Hi, I'm Mark, and on my channel I talk about UK politics and Brexit from an outside view. Although I do know the UK from the inside as well, so don't worry there. Brexit saved lives. With this bold thesis, former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson defended his country's exit from the EU in 2020 at a summit in Salzburg in Austria. He referred to the fact that his country had been able to roll out the COVID vaccination program faster than EU countries. Nor had gloomy forecasts such as mass unemployment or the exodus of bankers come true. Someone should tell him about transition periods, by the way. In fact, the British economy would have grown faster since 2020 than that of France, Germany and Italy, emphasized Johnson, who was British head of government from July 2019 to September 22. And he said, and as far as I know, they are all members of the EU. Probably in anticipation of such statements, a wave of criticism of his appearance had already been directed at the Federation of Austrian Industries, IV in short. They are the organizer of the Salzburg Summit. I don't think it's good that Johnson, who pushed Brexit forward, has been given such a platform. That was said by Salzburg Chamber of Commerce head Peter Buchmüller via Austrian newspapers. I don't know how anyone could profit from it. When asked, the Chamber also raised the question of whether the fee, and that won't be a small amount of money, was justified for someone who led Great Britain out of the EU and into a crisis. And the SPÖ, that's the Social Democrats in Austria, the European spokeswoman Sabine Klausner, also described it as questionable why Johnson, of all people, was the main speaker at the Salzburg Summit. Johnson had driven his country into the abyss, was radically neoliberal, and was out to get the greatest benefits for corporations. That was said by KPÖ Deputy Mayor of the city of Salzburg, Kai Michael Dankel. The Salzburg Summit serves as a platform for exchange and discourse about Europe, as what the IV justifies itself, and critical voices should have just as much space in this discussion as pro-European ones. The Federation of Austrian Industries, as a deeply pro-European organization, as they call themselves, is of the opinion that it is necessary to give space to all sides and perspectives and to discuss them openly. The focus of this year's conference with 40 other speakers was also on geopolitics, in particular the war of aggression against Ukraine. And with regard to Ukraine, Johnson also highlighted Brexit as valuable because it would have given the United Kingdom the opportunity to act differently from our European friends and partners during a crisis, he said. It's a lie, he could have done it anyway. I think we did not react sharply enough in 2014, said the ex-Prime Minister about the first invasion of Russian troops into Ukrainian territory on Crimea. He was proud that the United Kingdom was able to break with the European approach in February 22. We were the first major European country to supply lethal weapons to help the Ukrainians, said Johnson. If Putin would be allowed to do as he pleases in Ukraine, he would interpret this as a license to act similarly elsewhere. The signal that aggression pays off and can be successful will be heard elsewhere in the world, Johnson said. At the same time, Johnson, who was also once British Foreign Secretary, was also convinced that Ukraine could win the war because they want to be free, as he said. It would be a war of independence. Former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has also not completely ruled out a return to politics. If I really felt that I could contribute something meaningful in the future, then of course I would consider it, is what the former Conservative politician said on Friday at the summit in response to a question on this subject. Johnson, as I said, was head of British government from July 2019 to September 22. But my party, the Conservative Party, usually hires me to run for Mayor of London or to become Prime Minister and get Brexit done when they have no other ideas at all. That is the terrible truth, Johnson says. When all other options would have been exhausted, then he would be approached, but not before. And he is also very happy with his current job. I am writing a book, he says. In June it was announced that the former Prime Minister wants to publish his memoirs this autumn. And the book, entitled Unleashed, will be honest and unvarnished and will provide a deep insight announced at publisher HarperCollins, according to a report by the PA News Agency. But I think it will be another fairy tale book by Johnson. Johnson, a former journalist, was mayor of London from 2008 to 16, and during the election campaign before the EU referendum in June 2016, he was one of the most prominent politicians to support Brexit. And the then new Conservative Prime Minister Theresa May made Johnson her Foreign Secretary the same year. And in 2018, he resigned from his cabinet post amid a conflict over Brexit policy. And the following year, Johnson, who was a Brexit hardliner, took then over the party and government leadership from May. And he triumphantly won the general election in December 2019 with the slogan, "Get Brexit Done." In July 22, Johnson was forced to announce his resignation. Among other scandals, Partygate and Johnson's handling of allegations of violating COVID behavioral rules ordered by his own government made it increasingly difficult for him to remain in the Prime Minister's office. At the end of his last PMQs as head of government in the House of Commons in London on July 20th and 22, Johnson resorted to a famous quote from film history and said goodbye with the words, "Hasta la vista, baby." But Boris Johnson is not the best-known populist in Great Britain even. That's a different one. And that one doesn't have much concrete to say about culture, which became a topic now. And that's no wonder, because it's hard to advertise it to the masses. This Nigel Farage would rather stand in pubs and have his photo taken with a pint of beer than think about promoting culture. The Reform Party he leads, on the other hand, speaks passionately on its website about immigration, economic issues, the national health system NHS, and of course Brexit, of which Farage was one of the advocates and enablers. Cultural issues interest him above all when he can link them to patriotic concerns. Although the dividing line between patriotism and nationalism is hardly clear in Farage's case. What counts for him and his party is the maintenance of British culture, identity and British values, as they put it. And overall, his cultural policy plans in the broadest sense contain little that is constructive, but instead a catalogue of planned abolitions. As expected, Farage detests diversity, as shown in the Equality Act of 2010, which he believes requires discrimination in the name of positive action. He wants to abolish provisions on diversity, equality and inclusion that, in his point of view, have lowered standards in economic productivity. And he is planning legislation to prevent left-wing bias and politically correct ideology that threatens personal freedom and democracy. And he also wants to ban cancel culture and left-wing hate mobs and gender-based language, of course. And he sometimes, of course, also said he wants to stop the application of Sharia law in the United Kingdom. It's not clear exactly how the Reform Party envisages this. Instead, it has identified clear enemies. And Farage sees red when he thinks of the nonconformist, wasteful BBC, which he considers to be institutionally biased. And the TV license must go. In a world of television on demand, people should have a free choice, writes the Reform Party, as if the British were glued to their televisions and forced to watch BBC programs all the time. But culture for Farage, this is above all a question of ideological stance. The promotion of film, theatre, literature, music and museums is not even mentioned. This just makes it too complicated for slogans. Big statements can be made more easily when it comes to schools with their attitude-forming potential. Nigel Farage calls for a patriotic curriculum for them. Universities should be punished with fines and budget cuts if they show signs of political bias or prevent free expression. For the politician, there is no contradiction between the demand for a strictly patriotic education and the call for free expression. Though what sometimes some people call the father of Brexit is also concerned about the preservation of historical monuments, which is so important in tradition-loving England. And the object of his hatred is the National Trust, that's the Monument Preservation Association, which is the largest charity in the country with 5.37 million members. The National Trust is the fourth largest landowner in the UK and is influential not only in environmental and nature conservation issues, but also in areas that concern the interpretation of the past. The organization recently investigated the involvement of its historical properties in slavery and colonialism. Farage believes the National Trust is too woke and too politically correct, as he said in a program on the right-wing channel GB News, and they would have lost sight of their original purpose. But he also kept to himself what he thought that purpose was. Nevertheless, those two guys we will hear a lot about in the future. I'm quite sure about that. So I thought it was fitting to have them in one video. And if you want to know more, the next video is right here in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.